Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another video on gaming on Linux. And so today, I just wanted to kick the tires on my new Debian gaming build to see how much performance we're going to get. Historically, the video drivers for Nvidia have not been very good, and because there's been friction between the Linux community and the Nvidia corporation. But I think things are starting to improve a bit. And Nvidia's marketing slogan these days is frames win games. So here's my hypothetical question: do frames really win games? So we're really focusing here on in this case competitive shooters, specifically Counter-Strike 2. Now the reason I'm choosing Counter-Strike 2 for my testing is it's a game by Valve, and they provide a native version for Windows and Linux. So it's going to give us I think the closest comparison between the performance of the Nvidia video driver on Windows versus running on Linux. Because if we were going to run other games that are not native, that are being run through Proton, I think we're going to get a bit more variation. So I think this is kind of as close as I can get to, apples to apples comparison. Okay. So I'll put together a little presentation here. So I wanted to first just discuss how I did my benchmarking so that both Windows and Debian are as on equal footing as I can sort of make them without skewing any of the results. So in order to do that, what I did is obviously I had Counter-Strike 2 and Steam installed on my same gaming PC. And I went into Counter-Strike 2 in both Windows and on Linux, and I reset all the settings to their default values. Because I'm not interested in really, trying to go with a really high-end settings, and I don't want to go with really low-end settings, because with Counter-Strike, if you're running with like competitive graphics settings, you're really only going to be stressing your CPU. And if you go with really high graphical settings, you're going to end up being bottlenecked by your GPU. So I want to get a good mix of, CPU getting its leg stretched a bit and the GPU getting its leg stretched a bit. So we're not bottlenecking on one or the other. So try and keep a balance. So I kind of went with sort of the default middle of the road graphics settings. And also doing that, I made sure I needed the developer console enabled, and I'm disabled the Steam overlay, so that's not going to interfere in the background with the game. And we also had to increase the FPS limit to 1000 because by default it's set to 400. And also make sure on both systems we're running in full screen mode. And obviously make sure all the graphics and advanced graphics settings were identical on Windows and Linux. On my system, I have a Intel 13600K. So that CPU is what you call a big little architecture. So we have performance cores and efficiency cores. And in gaming tends to be games run better on high performance single cores. So having a game run across 20 cores is not gonna give you much benefit. So within Counter-Strike 2, I was surprised to notice they do provide an option for selecting to run with performance cores only. And so I certainly I made available that. And of course, after I made all these settings, before I started any benchmarks, I made sure I rebooted the game. So it's starting up fresh and all the settings were applied. On the Linux side, they'll also kind of try and even the playing field. We have, I use the tool called Linux Gamemode. So I don't know if you're familiar, but on Windows also has a game mode as well. So the idea is that when you launch a game on Windows, it detects that you're running a game, and then it tries to give more resources, hardware resources, to that running game. And so it'll, in the scheduling of the processes on the CPU and the hardware, it'll try and put everything into the background, put everything to sleep, so nothing's going to be competing with your game for clock cycles. So on Linux, we also have this utility, Linux Gamemode, which can do the same thing. Now, on Linux, it's not an automated process like it is on Windows. So but the end result, and use cases is the same thing as game mode on Windows. It's just trying to give your game process some more priority on the CPU, let the GPU clock a little higher, let the CPU, clock a little higher, make sure your game is, not jumping between performance cores and E cores and getting all jumped around. So, so we can use Linux Gamemode, but it's just an option. So once you've installed the utility, you just add it as a launch option in Steam under your game properties. So I made sure I used this when I was testing on Linux. So, try and make it a bit fair with the capabilities that Windows has versus Linux. So now let's review sort of my my current setup. So what versions of Debian I'm running, my hardware, my desktop environment, and my video driver. So you can see here I'm running the latest Debian Linux 13, which was just released a little under a week ago. And I'm running their standard kernel, 6.12.41. On my display, I have a Asus 27-inch 1440p gaming monitor that supports G-Sync, and adaptive sync, and it's clocked at 165 hertz. And from a desktop environment, I'm running KDE Plasma. For my desktop, I'll use Wayland. And my CPU, as I discussed, I got a Intel i5 13600K and an Nvidia GeForce RTX 4070 Super. And for memory, I got 32 gigs DDR4, I think it's 3200 RAM, CL16, I believe. And my disk, I just have a standard 1 terabyte NVMe drive. Can't remember the manufacturer off the top of my head. And for Linux video drivers, I'm running the latest proprietary NVIDIA Open driver from NVIDIA, version 580.65.06, and CUDA version 13, but I'm not using any CUDA, so it doesn't matter. So that's the Linux sort of platform. And now here's my Windows 10 information. So on the Windows side, I just grabbed the latest NVIDIA driver, GeForce driver, version 580.97. And for Windows, I'm running Windows 10 Pro, version 22 H2 build whatever 1904 blah blah blah. So been updated recently, so nothing crazy there. Okay, and now let's look at my Counter-Strike 2 settings. So as I discussed, I kind of want to go with sort of a middle of the road video settings. You can see from the video side, I'm running full screen, 1440p, at 164 hertz refresh rate. Well, it's 165 hertz on my monitor, but Counter-Strike sees it as 164 hertz. We're here, so on the advanced video settings, I have VSync disabled, NVIDIA Reflex low latency is enabled. At the maximum FPS up to 1000. We're not going to get capped if it managed to go above the default, I believe, was 400. Minimum in menus, doesn't matter. And then for anti-aliasing, we're using 4x. Global shadow quality high. Dynamic shadows. High textures. Isentropic filtering 2 times. High shaders. High particle detail. Ambient occlusion. High dynamic range. And FX super resolution is disabled. So you can see it's, probably a high quality graphic settings here. And then on the game side, game settings, so I just want to show here, I have to enable the developer console so I can get at the benchmark statistics. And then down here, so here's the option, CPU cores usage preference enables me to get Counter-Strike 2 to use performance cores only, which is great. I didn't think that was here, but so that's our Counter-Strike settings. So now I'm just gonna show you the benchmark video. So here's a video of the benchmark. So I'm using the one of the workshop maps, Aztec benchmark, which is very cool. It'll run It automatically starts, runs through a fixed sequence, and then at the end it calculates the average frames per second, and it also gives you the 1% lows. So I'll just kick that off here. So this is just like I said, a workshop map. You can just go and download this. And I use the ancient
Move it, son.
benchmark, because from my research, it's a more intense benchmark. It has a lot more going on than the Dust 2 benchmark. As you can see, obviously when I was benchmarking this, getting my data, I wasn't running OBS Studio and recording it at the same time. So this is just a recording of the benchmark. Just for your information purposes. Not very long, it's just about a minute. You can see this popping off a lot of smoke and flashbang, explosions, so that's part of the lights. Really trying to hurt the GPU and the smoke. But overall, yeah, it's really good. Frame rates. And that's it. Cool. As you can see here, just after the run, it just calculates the average frames per second and gives you the the P1 there. That's the 1% lows. Okay, we'll go back to so before I get into the results of my benchmarking, first just wanted to talk about what is a 1% low. You'll hear it kicked around in a lot of hardware benchmarks out there, and but sometimes people just assume you understand what it is, right? But basically, in a nutshell, what is people are trying to understand when 1% low is like, okay, so these are your worst performance. So these are the frames that were the worst. And we want to just say, okay, how bad did it get? And try and grab an average of these 1% low values. So it can kind of give you the idea is as opposed to objectively give you a number that reflects how smooth the game would feel if you're playing it. Okay. So anyway, feel free to pause the video and sort of read the description here, what it is. I'm not going to read this verbatim. Okay, so let's look at the benchmarks. So here we go. So here's I ran the benchmark 6 times, and you'll see in the bottom here there's 2 runs on Linux using Wayland and KDE, and 2 runs using X11 and KDE with the compositor disabled, and then 2 runs with Windows 10. So when I ran these benchmarks, I just ran them back to back. So I'd run, say, this benchmark, and I just repeated it immediately after. So this was just trying to, warm up the hardware, if there was any caching going on, what have you. Sometimes the second time you run things, the system's a bit more smooth, right? So I just want to try to eliminate any highs and lows. But also I didn't want to run 1,000 different benchmarks and average it out. I do have a life. So what was interesting though was, well, I can't say. I guess the one thing I was a little disappointed that Windows in the average frames per second beat out Linux. Now the differences weren't huge. So we're talking, what, 10 frames per second on average out of, you know, a total of 276 frames per second. So, you know, do your math. You could do graphically here, you can see the difference between the tops of these two. It's not too bad. And in the 1% lows, actually, Linux Debian 13 did better than Windows 10 by a smidge, right? And also, from what would be the optimal graphical session to be using for Counter-Strike 2, good old X11, I don't know if it's good, but old X11 with the KDE compositor disabled seemed to give us the best performance versus Wayland and KDE. So, but not a huge difference. Overall, pretty close. Now, I guess the question is, oh yeah, and also, so this set of data here, I'm running with E cores and P cores, but I did have that setting within Counter-Strike 2 to have Counter-Strike just used P cores on both Windows and Linux. But so yeah, you know, Windows has kind of still got the edge here a little bit, and I don't know if the you know, if you're a professional Counter-Strike 2 player, which statistic here is more important to you? You know, are these 1% lows more important? You know, if you're getting into a firefight and there's lots of smoke and flashbangs and particle effects going off, you know, that's when things are going to slow down, right? Linux kind of was able to hold its own, right? But on the high highs, so if there's not much going on, Windows is still has the edge. Anyway, interesting. That was interesting, but I don't know. I'm not a professional gamer. I think I could play Counter-Strike 2 if I wanted with on Debian 13 just fine. And wouldn't suffer too much for it. Okay, so next slide. Here's where I actually went into my BIOS on my computer and I disabled my E-cores. So when the system was running, there was no E-cores active on the CPU at all. And actually, it was kind of interesting that I actually got a little bit, slightly more performance than when the E-cores were available, but also telling Counter-Strike 2 to just use the P cores. So if we just go back here, so if we just look at Windows 10, right? So the average was 276, 278, right? E cores disabled. Go back, you know, 276, 277 on average. Not much change there on the average. The 1% lows still got better. So my 1% lows were 125.6, 129. Up here was 121, 122. So got about 7 or 8 frames per second better on the 1% lows on Windows. And then when we compare on this one on Linux, we got a couple extra average frames per second here. Oops. All right. But it seems like the 1% lows got worse, which was interesting. Oops. 266, 267, 267. So not much difference on the average, but the 1% lows only got worse when I disabled the E-cores. So I'm really not sure how to interpret this. I think my understanding is Windows 10 is not very good at handling E-cores and P-cores. So I'm wondering here if when the E-cores were available on Windows 10, it was kind of messing it up. But here maybe, but I'm pretty sure the on Linux, the Linux kernel is able to handle that big little architecture with Intel just fine. So I think it having E-cores available, it probably was able to push things into the background to give more resources to the game. And then when it had to juggle everything on just those P cores, so now we have just fewer P cores, and actually it was doing worse. I know it's hypothetical, but I'm not a Linux kernel expert, but I'm thinking though if I'm gaming on Windows 10, I'm thinking I might just make sure I keep the E-cores disabled. If I'm hopping back over there to do some, competitive gaming, some PUBG or Fortnite, this seemed to help a bit. Not a lot, but. So that's it for the data. I'll leave it up to you to decide, do frames win games, right? How fast is fast enough? Right? If you're running the latest and greatest 5080, 5090 GPU, do you need 500 frames per second in Counter-Strike 2? Are you gonna win more matches? Or are we just seeing diminishing returns? I don't know, right? But all I do know is people will pay thousands of dollars for that extra 5% lift in their frame rates. So from a marketing perspective for gaming, it's certainly a good way of getting people to shell out for those 5090s, 4090s, what have you. But is it become placebo, or is it really matter, right? Or is there other things that you have to take in consideration? But to each his own. Interpret the data as you see fit. Maybe my testing methodology was like totally out to lunch. But anyway, I was a little disappointed, but a little like, well, I think if I was doing casual gaming on Linux, it's fine, right? And I you know, sometimes even if I am playing a competitive game, sometimes you're like, well, you know, do you want to go with potato graphics, you know, and trying to get those extra frames, or sometimes do you just want to run, yeah, with decent graphics? You know, sometimes it's just easier on the eyes. I don't know. Everyone's different, but I do think, and at the end of the day, we can say that you know, gaming on Nvidia, on Debian 13, on Linux would certainly works, and works pretty darn good. Okay, but that's it for now. Wish you all luck in your games, and we'll see you around. And happy gaming.